Today on Versus. I'm joking. That's not a segment I'm actually going to do. Because I honestly believe that as an artist, it doesn't matter what materials you use as long as they give you the result that you want. But there's always the subject of paper for comic book artists, and it's kind of where my channel's geared towards is towards strictly to comic book artists. And I've gone over, what paper you should use. And one of the companies I didn't mention was Blue Line Art. And that's because I never had any of their paper on stock. I'd never really heard anything good about their house brand paper. It was always in conversation. They were like, oh, there's Blue Line Art for comic book paper. And then people were saying, yeah, but if you're going to spend the money to get pre-printed, just go with Eon because it's a better board. So I decided to see if indeed that was true. Now, I will put this disclaimer. Blue Line Art does indeed sell Strathmore paper, 300, 400, and 500 series, and 2-ply, 3-ply, and 4-ply options. I believe they have 4-ply options, but I know they have it 300, 400, and 500, and 2 and 3-ply. With the blue lines pre-printed. That is an advantage for anybody who does not know the dimensions and doesn't want to draw it in themselves with a T-square and a non-photo blue pencil on the Strathmore paper. The 400 series you cannot get in 11 by 17, so you have to buy sheets and cut it down, which is what I did with my 400 4-ply. Which was a mistake because 4-ply doesn't feed through my printer. So when I do it, I have to do the T-square and pencil option. So if you don't want to do that and you don't mind paying a premium for pre-printed paper, that is an option. But that's not what we're here to focus on because everybody knows Strathmore makes arguably the most widely accepted and used Bristol board. Cansen's another option. And Cansen does have the Fanboy series, which we previously discussed in another video. But we don't want to factor in these major paper companies. Eon's paper is not like pre-printed Strathmore, pre-printed Cansen. They're not a paper mill, so my guess is they have a supplier that supplies the Bristol to them, to their specifications, and they send it to a printer and have the non-photo blue lines printed on it, and then they are the retailer or supplier. Or not supplier, but distributor of the final product. Cansen and Strathmore have their own paper mills, to my understanding. Then again, I know, I guess Strathmore started to outsource their paper mills, but they still have a great product. Anyway, I wanted to do house paper versus house paper. So this is Eon's paper. They don't offer any other paper other than their paper, and then Blue Line's Pro Series paper. You're also gonna have to apologize about the shadows. I have a light source behind me, which is gonna cast that faint shadow. Then I have my desk lamp, which is gonna do that heavy shadow. So just bear with me. The setup is not for filming; it is for my personal work. So sorry, viewers. But yeah, house paper versus house paper, and the advantages of the Blue Line board are its price. It is a little bit cheaper. 10 sheets of this paper pre-printed run at about $10. So it puts the price mark at about $1 per page, which is about the cost of the Cansen pre-printed paper, and about the cost of 500 series non-pre-printed paper from Strathmore that you can get through like Blix. That said, non-pre-printed paper is always going to be cheaper. If you want to pre-print your own borders, have at it. It's probably going to be a little bit cheaper, but you also have to factor in the cost of your ink. So there's that. Anyway, getting down to it, the Blue Line Art board is cheaper. And right off the bat, you can notice the Eon is much brighter. It's even more drastic in person, but the white balance on my camera is probably not doing it justice. But it is much brighter, which I really don't care about because once you scan everything in, when you threshold the image, everything that's below 50% gray is going to be pure white. Everything darker than 50% gray is going to be pure black. So the brightness of the paper doesn't really make a difference to me. It's a nice bonus because if you're going to sell original artwork, the brighter the paper is, the nicer the final, it's gonna look nicer in person. Yeah, with a higher contrast, those lines are really gonna pop. And if you're selling original artwork, hey, the better it looks in person, the better off you are. So, other than that, I went ahead and just did some ink tests. This was a piece of paper that I did the original ink test on. There's where the square was cut out from the video of which paper should you use for comic books. I went ahead and just tested side by side the 3 most common inks I use, which are Ultra Draw from Koh-i-Noor, Dr. P.H. Martin's Black Star Matte, and Eon Vortex ink. Those 3 inks that I use primarily are the 3 inks I primarily use when brush is a factor. Those are like the top 3 brush inking inks I use. When I use a nib, my top ink is typically Pilot, but there's a lot of Sumi inks that I use as well that I can use with brush, but they tend to be a little bit more washed out in my experience. Although the Kaime was pretty dark. Anyway, not just going to talk about ink. So I went ahead and did it, and to my surprise, actually, when I did this, because I haven't used Ultra Draw ink at all lately. But it bleeds on the Eon board, which is something that it didn't used to do. So I don't know if Brett from Eon is going to watch this video or not. He tends to watch it when his products are featured because he cares about feedback on his product. So if you do see this video, I'm just curious, what changed in the paper? Not that it's a negative, because I don't mind using a different ink. But it's not something that used to occur on Eon board. So my guess would be at some point there was a change in the paper stock to improve it in other areas, and that was just one of the drawbacks. But if you have any insight on it, that'd be interesting. If you didn't change, if the paper supplier didn't change their stock a little bit, maybe Chart Pack reformulated their ink. Who knows? I know that's what Higgins did. So I was just curious about that. So the obviously from previous tests we saw that the Ultra Draw ink now bleeds on Eon board. Deleter number 3 bleeds, and Higgins Black Magic is absolutely horrible on this paper, which we all knew. Same 3 inks bleed on this. So I tested all 16 inks, and the obvious failures were the Ultra Draw ink, which is abbreviated as UD. As you can see right there, the Universal bled as well. It's harder to see on there, but it did indeed bleed. The Universal did bleed on the Eon board as well, but I never use Universal on anything other than my Tech pens. The Black Magic bled as well, as did the Deleter number 3. So there must be like a solvent or something that's used in all 3 of those inks that I have in common that is what causes the bleeding. That's my only guess. So, at first look, I was like, damn, this paper is decent. It's so far not having any disadvantages. And then when I felt the paper, I was like, damn, it's smoother. So I'm like, if it's really this smooth, then the inking on this thing should be a joy. And if it does hold up just as good, if not better than the Eon board, man, it's cheaper. I may switch over to it. That went quickly out of my head as I decided to ink something on this, and was quickly shown that this paper absorbs the ink. It doesn't lay the line on top. It doesn't hold the ink on top. It absorbs it. And what happened is even in my brush feathering, see if you can see this, it bled. Like everything bled on this board. The only thing I found that did not bleed, which was Vortex ink in combination with a Maru pen, did not bleed. But that said, that's a ridiculous combination I have to use. The G pen, it bled with the G pen. The Hunt 102 nib was a disaster on this paper. I'm not going to splice in the video, but I do have the video of it. But basically, it just like tore the paper, like the very surface of the paper, and then the ink spilled. It was like sponged up immediately, and just I almost had a heart attack. when it happened because I was like, no, my illustration. By the way, this is pencils are by Adam Warren. This is his character Empowered from the series Empowered, and that's what I decided to ink. And yeah, so just inking on this paper is not a good thing. You can probably get away with it, because granted, when I did scan it in and reduce it, it didn't look bad. So if you're using only a brush, the bleeding was greatly minimized by using a brush, which I had a feeling was going to be the case. Like, all said and done, on their website, they say, recommend brush only. So I kind of had a feeling that Nibs were going to do something weird with this paper. And now I see why, because it bleeds like friggin' crazy. So if you're going to use like a brush and fine liners, like if that's your thing, if fine liners are your thing, this paper is an okay alternative. But there's a lot of drawbacks to it. Now, this is a 3-ply paper, so it is slightly thicker than the Eon board. However, the weight of the paper seems to be maybe more of like a 90-pound paper versus 130. So there's not too much of a difference in the paper itself in overall thickness. It is slightly thicker, and I do prefer the 3-ply, which is a big thing that like first turned me on to the paper. But the lighter weight of the paper means it's not as compressed, it's not as dense, and I think that's what leads to the tearing in the surface. And which also I think is why it feels smoother. I don't think it's really smoother. I think it might be softer, which gives you the illusion of a smoother paper. Because the pen did certainly not glide on it as well as I thought it was going to. So, overall, it just didn't turn out to be as good of a paper. If you want a pre-printed option that's a little bit cheaper for pencils, then this might be the option for you. Because it does fare. I mean, it is great for pencils, and if you're brush inking and fine lining, it might be okay because the fine liners didn't. They weren't as horrible as with a nib. So. It's just you're going to use a smaller size than you normally would to compensate for the slight bleeding. So it's one of those things that it's an option, but the price difference between the Eon and the Blue Line is very negligible. In fact, it might be because you do get more paper in the pack out of the Eon. I think you get 12 sheets. It was 12 or 15 sheets, and the price on it, I want to say, is around $15 versus 10. So, and it is a superior paper. So, all said and done, the paper is brighter, the surface is more durable, the ink compatibility is the same, but it does indeed hold the ink properly as you would expect from a comic board. So, the verdict goes to between the two house brand papers. Eon wins hands down. Does Eon win over Strathmore? That's debatable for me. For me, Eon is an alternative. And what I have noticed, caveat here, it's something here just to keep in mind. The reason I started ordering from Eon is because, and this is true with a lot of people, is Strathmore papers seem to have issues with consistency, which was you would get one page that would hold ink great, and then one that would bleed in certain spots. And then, or one batch would be great and one batch would be horrible. Then the next batch you get would be horrible. And you're like, what is going on here? Strathmore will replace the paper, but you got to go through like this headache to get decent paper. Now, that was several years back when that first started occurring. And I haven't had that much of an issue with it since. So Strathmore's improved. So you go with Eon or Strathmore. Well, Strathmore is not going to have pre-printed blue lines, so you have to either pay a super premium to get it pre-printed through Blue Line, or you can get the Eon board, which is comparable, or you can do the blue lines yourself. Now, I happen to have a printer that can handle up to 3-ply Bristol and print the blue lines on there, so that tends to be what I do the most. The Eon board is typically reserved for actual projects that I do. And where I think that the original art might be something that I want to showcase. The Strathmore paper, I use like 300 for like random bulk crap. The 400 and 500 series goes towards professional projects, whereas it's just because I can get it in bulk and it's cheaper. So That's what I do. Anyway, I just wanted to illustrate that there are the two primary companies, Eon and Blue Line, and if you're looking at their paper and the non-Strathmore options, Eon is definitely the way to go. It is the superior paper, despite the slightly more expensive cost. But hope you guys found this video informative, and this is disappointing. I do not pencil much, and my page layouts and pencils are typically not done on Bristol. I normally only use the Bristol for inking, so yeah. Anyway, guys, hope you found it informative, and leave any questions or comments or suggestions for future videos below.